What have you got to show for it? Kind of one of those self-evaluating type questions. What have you got as a result of what you have been doing? What have you got now, given what's been going on in the past? This Good Friday, we turn 8 years old as a church. A lot of labor by a lot of people over quite some time now. And it's a good question to ask. What do we have to show for it? What do we have as a result of what we've been doing? And how would we measure what we have to show for it? It's a question that we tend to hit at various hinge points in our lives, whether it's the proverbial midlife crisis or a change in season, of which there are several in every life. What have I got to show for it? Where have my past efforts got me to in the present? And what does that say about my future direction? The reason it's an important question is because we want to live valuable, meaningful lives. And in the same way, as a church, we want to be a valuable community whose existence counts for something, both in the long run and in the present. And so that's why I've chosen John's passage here, Jesus' words in John 15, because I really think that they help us to frame our thinking. This is the seventh and final of Jesus' I am sayings. I could test you if this was Sunday school, but I'm sure you guys absolutely could rattle them off completely. No, I'm not going to test you. I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. I'm the gate for the sheep. I'm the good shepherd. I'm the resurrection. I'm the way, the truth, and the life. And now, finally, Jesus says, I am the vine. And the vine is a Bible image soaked with symbolic meaning. In Jewish tradition, the vine was a picture of Israel, the people of God. And Psalm 80, kind of the second half of the psalm, says that God brought a vine out of Egypt. That's how he describes the story of the Exodus. He brought a vine out of Egypt and he planted that vine in the promised land so that it would flourish there. But he goes on to say that that vine, the psalmist says, the vine saw some tough times. It was ravaged by wild animals. The grazers walked all over it and nibbled at it. It needed protecting and reestablishing. Later on, Isaiah the prophet in chapter 5, he writes that the vineyard of Israel, rescued and planted in the promised land in order to bear good grapes, had instead borne wild grapes. They were supposed to be a distinctive witness to the nations around them, but because of sin, they'd failed to be the vine that God had rescued them to be. And so, hundreds of years later, Jesus arrives, and he appropriates that language to himself, the climactic I am saying of all that God is doing in the world. I am that vine, the true vine. Where Israel have failed, I am the true vine, which is explosive language, isn't it? The vineyard, all of God's people kind of planted individually in the soil of Israel have been replaced by one single vine in the middle of the field. Which means in claiming to be true Israel, he's claiming to be the one in whom, we saw this as we referenced Abraham last week, in whom all of God's promises made to Abraham and all that God is doing in the world are centered. All of it is resting on him. So that now what has actually been always the case throughout the Bible story is now blindingly obvious to us as Christians. That God's true people, his genuine people, are those who are attached to that true vine, that one vine, not by their genes or their nationality or their culture, but by faith. Which is to say they trust and they follow Jesus. And Jesus is laying out that to remain in God and in his people, you therefore need to remain in him, abide in him, attached to him. And that is what he commands in verse 4. Abide in me and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit by itself, unless it abides in the vine, neither can you, unless you abide in me. He is the vine, we are the branches. That phrase, abide in me, occurs 11 times in this passage. Jesus repeats it again and again. Verse 5, for example, whoever abides in me. Verse 6, whoever does not abide in me. 11 times. And it's a picture of great intimacy. So you could ask the question, as you look at a vine, you're going through the winelands, is the branch attached to the vine, or is the vine attached to the branch? And the answer is yes. And Jesus says, abide in me and I in you. Jesus, who will soon leave to return to the Father, he's urging the disciples who he leaves behind in this grand project of the church, in the same way that you were joined to me by faith, now remain in me in that perfect intimate union. What does that mean practically? John Mark Comer, he's from the States. He writes a book called Practicing the Way of Jesus. He puts it something like this, and I'm paraphrasing him. Our lives as Christians and as the church consist of two things. They consist of everything that we do and being with Jesus. For those who are not in Christ, there's only everything that we do. But for Christians, to that has been added being with Jesus. And his point is that those two things must exist always together simultaneously. Abiding is not an unusual or a separate exercise apart from life. It's a thing that you get to do for a couple of days on a holiday when you go away. Then you go plug into Jesus and be refueled and then get back to normal life. No, normal life is lived when you are plugged into the vine. The subtitle of his book is Be with Jesus, Become Like Him, Do as He Did. And so abiding means being a lifelong disciple of Jesus, being with him, becoming like him, doing as he did in the stuff of normal life. And the image that Jesus gives us colors in the context of where it is that he expects that to take place. Remaining within the vine happens in the context of remaining together with the rest of the branches in proper relationship with a community of people that know and love Jesus as Lord. It's in the context of his body, the church. There aren't a bunch of individual Jesus vines, each with one branch. That's our distorted view of how we relate to God and what it means to be part of his people. Here I am and I'm attached to Jesus, and no, there is one vine. And there are a whole bunch of branches attached to that one vine, so that as I remain in him, so I remain in the context of the rest of the vine as well. My relationship with Jesus is in the context of my relationship with his church. And Jesus' prayer, his high priestly prayer, 2 chapters later, John 17, makes that really, really clear. His prayer in John 17, it speaks of how intertwined those two remainings are. So Jesus' prayer for his disciples as he's leaving them, as they feel vulnerable, as the world is going to be opposed to them, Jesus prays, I do not ask, Father, that you take them out of the world. Well, that would be tempting to do if you're wanting to protect your people, wouldn't it? A hostile environment, I'd want to get you out of there. Jesus says, I don't ask that, but I ask that you would keep them from the evil one. They are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. And so he prays for these believers, verse 21, that they may all be one, just as you, Father, are in me and I in you, that they also may be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. That is Jesus' strategy for the protection of his people. That they all may be one, they remain in each other, just as Jesus and the Father are in each other, so that they may also be in us. And the product of that will be, the world will believe that you have sent me. That hostile world. It was a joy this year to welcome 49 people into formal membership, 28 back in November, 21 just now earlier in February. And this came up in the membership discussions, kind of at a group level and individual level. What are we expressing in our membership of the church? And the answer is we're expressing our membership in Christ. That the benefits of abiding in Christ, many of them are experienced in the benefits of remaining in his body on earth. He has provided that environment, that sanctuary. And it is the place where we give expression to the spiritual reality of this vine image. Because the consequences of remaining as opposed to not remaining in Jesus couldn't be more stark. So verse 4, as the branch cannot bear fruit by itself, nor will you if you don't remain in the vine. Verse 5, whoever abides in Jesus and Jesus in him will bear much fruit. Apart from Jesus, you can do nothing. Verse 6, anyone who does not abide will be thrown away like a branch and will wither. The branches will be gathered and thrown into the fire and burned. Jesus is saying, if you don't abide in me, you cannot bear fruit, which is to say that you can do nothing of lasting value with your life. But if you remain, you will bear much fruit. So we start to see that abiding is an end in itself, abiding in Jesus, but it is also a means to an end, which is bearing fruit. It's really striking that Jesus' command to his disciples is not the command to bear fruit. There is one command, and it is remain in the vine, remain in me. If you do, you will bear fruit automatically. You won't be able to stop yourself from doing that. And Jesus is teaching that if we make him the integration point of all that we do as a church, growing in our discipleship of him, which is another language for remaining and abiding in him, it's being disciples of him, then the fruit will come naturally and inevitably. Verse 8 uses the language, we will be proven disciples, and his Father will be glorified. Evidently, the fruit is loving obedience to Jesus' command to love. That is what abiding works out as. The fruit of abiding in him is that we become like him. The fruit of the Spirit are all of the characteristics of Jesus, which you can sum up as love. Before we drill down into that, let's just take stock of where we've got to. What do we have to show for it? Well, maybe Jesus' words speak to us as a church, and they help us. They help us frame our vision, our ambition. And our ambition for us as individuals, for us corporately as a church, is to abide in the vine, to remain in Jesus, believe the truth about him, and follow his way, so that everything that we put our hand to, whether it's reaching out or it's hospitality or it's one anothering within the church, it is about our discipleship and helping others as disciples. It is about remaining. Let that frame our vision in a singular way. But then secondly, it also provides a diagnostic question, which is, are we seeing fruit at a personal level and at a corporate level? And as we look for that fruit, what does that say to us about the extent to which we're abiding in Jesus? We can't be simplistic about answering that. We need to be careful how we measure fruit. So Jesus says in verse 9, as the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. These things I have spoken to you, that my joy may be in you, your joy may be full. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. We have nothing to show for it. If we're asking this question of measuring fruit as a gauge of the extent to which we are remaining, we have nothing to show for it if we don't have Jesus-shaped love, which is fully orbed. It is love for him, it is love for one another within the vine and the body, and it is love for the lost. A few chapters earlier, Jesus in John 13 says, it is by your love that the world will know that you are my disciples. That is the identifying marker. It's evidence that you are abiding in Jesus, abiding in his love, that you then love. The vine planted in the middle of the field, Jesus-like family love that will draw others trapped in a loveless world to it. So it's not simple, it's not completely simple to gauge. It can't be engineered or manipulated. But I do think that you know the genuine thing when you see it. And you also know the opposite of it. It comes with being disciples of Jesus and making disciples of Jesus, which is not the easy path. We shouldn't be thrown by that. That Jesus says in verse 18 and 19, remaining in me is going to put you at odds with the world that was hostile towards me. The values of the world, which we all by default imbibe, all of us, can be summed up in a nutshell as self-love. And so as we seek to love God and love neighbor, we're pulling in tension with that sinful part of ourselves and the world opposed to Jesus. What does that say to us as Hope Central? One of the challenges that you'll have experienced if you've been part of the furniture for any length of time in this church is that in a smaller church, there are fewer places to hide when it comes to putting your hand to the plow and being involved. And you know, Bryden, you always get nervous when Bryden's approaching you because there's another roster gap that needs plugging, and you're already on 4 of them. It is a blessing, though, to have all these opportunities to plug in, to know that you are needed. And, I mean, I could ask Bryden to list all the gaps now. I mean, there's kids helpers. We need 1 or 2 on the coffee team. We need a couple on the welcome team. Can I encourage you to plug in? Yeah, there's not much place for you to hide. But where I particularly want to encourage you to plug in is in your small groups. Plow into the lives of your groups. One anothering family love is not solely on your leaders. I hope that you're grateful and you express it for the work that your leaders plow into in teaching you and facilitating so that you are encouraged to remain in Jesus. But not all of the one anothering is on them. It's supposed to kind of facilitate the one anothering of each other in the group. And so there's an invitation. Here's another invitation. This year we're doing the overview. It is God's overarching story. And can I invite you to ask yourself the question, what one thing uppermost in your mind about your discipleship, about your remaining in Jesus, loving him, loving one another, loving the lost? What area of that needs a long, slow, deep work? We're taking a nice leisurely journey through the scriptures. And wouldn't it be amazing if that road trip came with the benefit of helping us to remain in Jesus? It's specifically in an area where you are struggling. Put that before the Lord. Put the scaffolding up and let him work on it. Life in a small to medium-sized church can be a challenge. There's place to hide, but there is the benefit. Because abiding, I think it's fair to say, precludes hiding. Certainly we cannot hide ourselves from God ever, but nor can we hide ourselves from each other. Nor should we ever seek to hide ourselves away from the world in a comfortable huddle. In this church, everybody gets to do that at their own pace with God. But that is the trajectory that we are on. Let me speak about an opportunity and a challenge at the Life of Hope Central. We're grateful to have a spread of ages because that tests and it grows family love. Here's an opportunity that we have. We have an opportunity with our youth. We are blessed with a high proportion of our church being children. This is my count. We have 16 in high school. A couple of years ago, we had 2, right? I say couple, not literally 2 years ago. We have 7 in upper primary. We have 14 in lower primary. We have 9 in preschool. And I think we have 5 in the baby category. 51 children. We have more children in lower primary than all of the children in the church put together when we planted. Children are fantastic evangelists. If there's something good going on, they are brilliant at sharing it. And I'm so grateful that there is so much good going on in the life of the church. I mean, we've tapped into that by taking Bryden on board. That's a significant step this year for him to move from half-time to full-time. But expressed in what goes on a Sunday with the toddlers and the kids and the youth, but also now on Fridays, the Alfinos have very bravely opened their home not just every second week for the junior youth, but now every intervening week for the senior youth as well. There is good news. Children are evangelists. Can you encourage them? Can you come around that? Can you pray? Can you think of young people who might get plugged into that? Can you intentionally develop relationships in your community, at the school gate, go along to school functions, and naturally develop those kind of relationships, but intentionally, where you think there's good news that your youth might be able to hear, and we have opportunities in our church for them to hear that, for them to be loved and experience the love of Jesus. Here's a challenge. When we think about church family, our number of young adults grew significantly over the past few years. It grew when we were in the Presbyterian church, have grown steadily over the years. But in this kind of 6-month period, December through June, we're losing a high proportion of our young adults because it's a very transient stage of life and many people are moving away. They will be sorely missed. Each one of them is going to leave a gap. I am praying that in His time, the Lord would bring us more young adults. But that is not the challenge. The challenge is, and this came out in something that Sam Albury shared at a breakfast event yesterday morning, a few of us went to, where it was really upbuilding. Will we have God's perspective on our church, that the nuclear family is not the building block of this church? Families are important, I guess, sociologically. There's a degree of stability that come with it, nuclear families. But the family of Christ is the building block of this church. A worldly way of assessing how we're doing might be, have we got sufficient people in each age demographic so that somebody coming in feels at home? The assumption there is that to attract and retain a crowd of a certain demographic, you need to already have a crowd of that demographic. And there may be some sociological truth in that. But more fundamentally, what's to be attractive about us to everyone is our love. And that means people across ages expressing that in the 4-letter word. That's what a friend of ours used to say. Love is a 4-letter word. It's spelled T-I-M-E. You could say it's also spelled C-A-R-E. Time and care. Especially when it's done across the ages. So the single person welcomed into a family home as a regular at the table, just because there's an opportunity for them to be embraced and be an older sister to their kids or older brother, or an opportunity for somebody who's older on in years to come alongside and to be praying, and for us to kind of keep an eye out. That's what the multi-generational church affords. Not a challenge. It puts a challenge in front of us to say, will we embrace what Jesus put in front of us, so that remaining in Him, we will be loving. And wouldn't it be wonderful if the Lord used that and instructed us along the way about the kind of fruit that God is pleased with? He delights in growing numbers of people coming under the sound of the gospel, but He delights in a heart of love. 2 areas of governance to touch on in the life of the church, and these are not at odds with love. These are things that facilitate love. Firstly, to do with elders. I'm grateful to Tumi and to Steve for the ways in which they serve and labor as elders in a kind of proactive way and in a reactive way. But we would like to grow the eldership to fit the needs of a growing church. The process in our constitution is that anybody could come to the elders and propose someone, kind of nominate them for consideration as an elder. The elders then consider that person, weigh them up, and they would have obviously been thinking and praying about who might take on eldership. That person needs to be a man who is abiding in Jesus, with evident fruit to see in their lives, and the pastoral epistles spell that out. And they will go through and they will evaluate that person. There might be a development process. And then they will propose their nominee or nominees, if there's more than one appointment in the offing, to the church for acceptance. So that is an invitation for you to prayerfully consider, is there someone who you would like to bring to the elders to nominate? The second thing is to do with our constitution. Our existing constitution has served us since the church was planted 8 years ago, but it is outdated and it is currently being revised. Extensive work has gone into it by the elders in consultation with somebody who knows their way around church constitutions. We had said that we would bring that constitution here. We have not done that for voting and acceptance. There is still more drafting work that's going to go on in the next couple of months. And during term 2, we would like to have consultation with a group of, say, up to, just so that it doesn't get unwieldy, say up to half a dozen people from the church to get their input on that document. And so if you would like to raise your hand for that, if things like constitutions interest you, or even if they don't, even if you're just thinking how does this facilitate love in the church and protect things that are important, then please come and chat to me or to Tumi or to Steve. And then we will present a final draft to the church for acceptance, which, God willing, will be, we won't wait until the next AGM for that. Let me finish with an assurance and an apocalyptic parable. Apocryphal, not apocalyptic. Here's the assurance. Yeah, there's no assurance in apocalypse. Assurance. In order to produce fruit, God is going to prune us. Pruning is not pleasant. It is like losing a limb. There are ghost pains involved with that. I was speaking to somebody the other day. He came to repair my garage door, and he told me about a garage door that had fallen on his toe once. I think it was his baby toe. A number of operations later, the toe was not working. It was a big problem for him, and so they cut the toe off. He still gets a pain in that toe. He misses his toe, but life is much improved for him on the whole. If we are fruitless, he lops off branches. If we're bearing fruit, he takes the clippers and he prunes, not to destroy, but to make us more fruitful. It does feel, when he prunes, whether it's individually or corporately, that God is cutting off something that is essential to life. But the wonderful assurance in it all is that God is a skilled and a careful gardener. He has you in view. He has us in view. He has the whole vine in view. Then the apocryphal parable. This is to our question, what do we have to show for it? It must be framed, mustn't it, by the bigger question. It must be measured by the bigger question of what does God have to show for it. And verse 8 is the key to how we should think. God's aim, verse 8, is that he should be glorified through the production of fruit. By this my Father is glorified, that you bear much fruit and so prove to be my disciples. God is glorified, is that God has something to show for it. This parable was, I think, told, Judy will probably be able to feedback, I believe by Elizabeth Elliot. And the background to Elizabeth Elliot's life, you'll know that her husband Jim was murdered with others by the group of Auca Indians that they were seeking to reach out to. They landed on the beach and they were ambushed and killed. That's a type of pruning to go through, isn't it? If you're Elizabeth Elliot. Temptation, when that goes on, is to move and settle into a sustainable, less risky mode of existence. She didn't. She doubled down. For her, remaining meant pursuing. And so she became a missionary to the Auca Indians herself. But there's a story earlier on in her life where she had given herself to missionary outreach, and she had applied herself in particular to the work of translating the Bible into the language of the group that she was reaching. And she came to a point after 9 months of painstaking, intensive work, of having all of her notebooks and her charts and all of the work that she had done on the language of the tribe that she was seeking to see the scriptures. And she boxed all of this up and handed it over to a fellow missionary who was going to take that and do the work of translating the Bible. And in the process, that box was stolen from that missionary. And these are the days of paper, no backups. All of that lost. It could leave you asking, God, where are you in this? This is a painful pruning. She tells the parable. Jesus was walking one day with his disciples, asked each of them to pick up a stone to carry for him. They all picked up a stone. Peter picked up a rather small one, John a bigger one. Jesus led them to the top of a mountain. He commanded the stones to be made bread. They were exhausted, they were hungry, and so they were given permission to now eat the bread that was in their hands. And of course, Peter didn't have very much. John kindly shared with him some of the bread that had been made from the heavy stone that he had carried. On another occasion, the same Jesus took the same disciples for a walk, and again he asked them to pick up a stone to carry for him. And this time you can imagine Peter thought twice. He says, I'm going to pick up a bigger stone. But on this occasion, Jesus didn't ask them to carry the stone to the top of a mountain. He took them to the river. And as he stood by the bank of the river, they're there with questions in their minds. He said to them, throw the stones into the river, which they did at once in obedience to his command. And then they looked up at him expectantly, waiting for this miracle that would happen again. But nothing happened. And they waited and they watched, and nothing happened. And Jesus, with great compassion, looked at his disciples whom he loved, and he said, for whom did you carry the stone? And so Elizabeth Elliot writes, after this, many moments of pain in her life, this grief, this sorrow, this total loss that empties my hands and breaks my heart, I may, if I will, accept. And by accepting it, I find in my hands something to offer. And so I give it back to him, who in mysterious exchange gives himself to me. That's our question as a church. The Lord may show us fruit in a surprising way. The pruning may be painful, but we are to remain in him, in his love, and will bear fruit. The question is, for whom do we carry the stone? It is not what we have to show for it at the end of the day. It is what he has to show for it. Just take a moment in the quiet of your hearts just to reflect on that. And then I'd love to open up the floor to discussion. Father, we thank you that your Son said that he is the vine, he is the fulfillment of everything that you have planned and purposed and worked to do in history, gathering a people to him, attached to him, resourced and given life by him. Would we be a church that abides in him and so bears fruit to your glory? Amen.